My new boss hates my guts. I was going to be late by exactly 20 minutes and 2 seconds. I placed the sandwich between my lips and pulled my shoes over my heels while hopping down the street. The cool morning air still had the sweet smell of rain, but I was already sweating up a storm in my blue suit set. Will I be hired if I show up as a sweaty mess? I asked myself, knowing I had to look prim and proper to even be considered for the position of executive secretary to Xavier Thomas. Xavier Thomas, CEO and heir to one of the biggest acquisition companies in New York. They had their finger on the pulse of every single sector. They didn't need me. I needed them. With that, I pushed my legs harder in the direction of the bus stop. Before I could make it to the other side, I caught sight of a car speeding in my direction. Was I going to die? I fell to the ground in shock, eyes tightly shut as I awaited the pain. It never came. As I lay sprawled on the ground, sandwich squished against my lips, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the glamorous New York Job Committee's way of saying, "Welcome to the Big Apple job market, where we'll flatten you faster than a pancake." The car screeched to a halt inches away from me, and I peered up, squinting against the morning sun, expecting to see a handsome prince or at least a dashing chauffeur. Instead, I was met with a scruffy-looking guy, his hair sticking out in all directions like he just escaped from a tornado. "Excuse me, sir, I'm pretty sure I didn't hit you," he exclaimed, his voice grating on my already frazzled nerves. "Didn't hit me? Oh, well, thank you, kind sir, for narrowly missing me with your chariot of death," I retorted, scrambling to my feet and brushing my now dirt-streaked suit. The man's eyes widened, and he glanced nervously at the back seat of the car before returning his gaze to me. "Listen, buddy, I'm really sorry about that. Are you okay?" I huffed, glaring at him. "Am I okay? Do I look okay to you?" I gestured to my disheveled appearance, the sandwich still dangling from my lips, and perhaps that was the reason my words weren't very clear. He winced, looking genuinely sorry. "Look, I'll make it up to you, okay? Here, take this." He shoved a wad of bills into my hand, and I blinked in surprise. "What's this for?" I demanded, eyeing the cash suspiciously. "It's for your troubles," he said, nodding toward the back seat again. "Courtesy of my boss." I followed his gaze and saw a shadowy figure reclining in the luxurious interior of the car. The window was tinted, but I could make out the silhouette of a man, his posture exuding an air of casual arrogance. "That's your boss?" I asked incredulously, then turned back to the driver. "Well, tell your boss that money can't buy me off. I want a personal apology, and I want it now." The driver looked torn, glancing back at his boss before sighing and turning back to me. "I'm sorry, but my boss doesn't do apologies." I felt my blood pressure skyrocketing, a mix of anger and frustration bubbling up inside me. "Well, isn't that just peachy?" I muttered, clenching my fists at my sides, realizing I was already late for my interview. I glanced at my watch and cursed under my breath. Great, just great. Now I'm going to be late for the most important interview of my life, and all because of some reckless driver and his apology-allergic boss. With a resigned sigh, I straightened my suit as best as I could, ignoring the dirt stains and the torn hem of my pants. "Well, no point crying over spilled coffee," I muttered, steeling myself for the inevitable embarrassment awaiting me at this interview. As I hurried down the street into the next bus, sandwich still dangling from my lips like a deranged food critic, I couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of cosmic joke. Here I was about to interview for a prestigious position as the executive secretary to Xavier Thomas, CEO extraordinaire, and I looked like I'd just crawled out of a dumpster. But hey, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that you can't judge a book by its cover. And who knows, maybe Xavier Thomas is the kind of guy who appreciates a little dirt under the fingernails, or in my case, a lot of dirt on the suit. With that hopeful thought in mind, I squared my shoulders and marched into the sleek glass building that housed Xavier Thomas's empire. As I stepped into the sleek modern lobby of Xavier Thomas's company, I couldn't help but feel like a bedraggled sheep among a herd of perfectly groomed wolves. The other applicants, both male and female, were dressed to the nines in sharp suits and elegant dresses. Confidence oozed from all of their pores. Meanwhile, I stood there in my dirt-streaked suit and torn shoes, feeling like a reject from a second-hand clothing store. God help me. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, My name was finally called and I was ushered into the inner sanctum of the CEO's office. The room was magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city's skyline and shelves lined with prestigious awards. Family photos adorned the walls and intricate pieces of decor brought the office to life. And there, seated behind an imposing mahogany desk, was Xavier Thomas himself. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into my very soul. There was something about him that felt familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Fine. Time to introduce myself. Before I could gather my wits and introduce myself, Xavier spoke, his voice as smooth as silk, but with a hint of steel beneath the surface. "You're late," he said, not bothering to look up from the papers scattered across the desk. Bang! The problem. Darn, that crazy driver. I opened my mouth to protest, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I don't have time for tardiness. Leave now and don't waste any more of my time." "But sir, I began, only to be silenced by a withering glare from Xavier. I felt a surge of indignation rising within me, fueled by the injustice of it all. "Out," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. With a frustrated huff, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the office, muttering colorful expletives under my breath. Once again, I was wronged, yet, once again, I couldn't do anything about it. Danny the pushover, Danny the weirdo. As I descended the staircase, I fished my phone out of my bag and sent a message to my friend group chat. For some reason, I was always out of loop with Reggie and Sam. It started with occasional movie dates to friendship dinners that I didn't get the memo for. Maybe I didn't see their messages, so I created a group. Nice idea, right? I started with a single message. "Guys, I just had the craziest day." I waited for a minute. The active green dot on their profile indicated that they could see my messages. Then, to get them to reply, I added, "Sadly, I won't be getting this job. I'm so sad." I added a crying emoji at the end of it. Emojis never failed to get the point across. Finally, Reggie started typing. He sent a simple and easiest reply in the world. "That's sad. You'll be fine, I guess." To be honest, I was used to their flippant replies, but this stung. I shoved my phone into my pocket and opted for the stairs. Sad moments like this needed a dramatic montage, but just as I reached the ground floor and prepared to make my dramatic exit, a voice called out to me from behind. "Wait!" I turned to see a worried-looking woman rushing toward me, her high heels clicking against the marble floor. "Mr. Thomas wants to see you again," she said, breathlessly, her cheeks flushed with exertion. I raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "He does? But he just kicked me out." The woman shrugged apologetically. "I don't know what changed his mind, but he specifically asked for you to come back." Well, who was I to argue with the whims of a petty CEO? With a shrug, I followed the woman back up the stairs and into Xavier's office once more. To my surprise, Xavier's demeanor had softened slightly, though the steely glint in his eyes remained. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. I did as I was told, though I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. What had prompted Xavier to demand my return? And more importantly, did I really want to work for someone who could be so temperamental in his decision-making? But before I could dwell on those thoughts any longer, Xavier spoke again, his voice cutting through the silence with a knife. "Congratulations," he said, his lips quirking up into a faint smile. "You've got the job. When can you start?" "Excuse me?" "Mr. Young, did I stutter?" No, he didn't. I jumped up to my feet with an ingratiating smile. "Of course not, sir." 2 weeks later. I should have looked the gift horse right in the mouth. My chest constricted with harsh breaths as I ran up the stairs. The elevator was taking too long and the noodles in my hand were getting soggier by the minute. "Just one more step," I tried to encourage myself as I made my way up to the highest floor. Mr. Thomas was strict. He got into the office exactly at 9 in the morning, brief by 9:15, breakfast by 10, and general meeting by 11. If I thought being the office pushover at my last workplace was bad, I'd graduated into being Xavier Thomas's personal pushover here. Finally, I made it into his office at exactly 10:05 a.m. "Here's your food, sir." The classic noodle box from the Chinese place down the street hit the table with a thud. "Whose food?" he queried, glancing up at me. "Yours?" I replied with a wince. He glanced down at his papers and got back to work. That soggy box of noodles belongs to someone else. I made it clear that I eat only piping hot noodles that's on my table by 10 every morning. Oh, poor noodles. They were not even that soggy. I ended up eating the noodles. It seemed I still had a long way to go with Mr. Thomas. Working for Xavier was a difficult task, but I was happy to have a job. Truth was, I used to be unfulfilled in both life and friendship. I was a pushover and my kindness became my weakness. My former job was tiring and my friends didn't seem to like me as much as I liked them. But again, maybe it was all in my head. So I would do everything in my power to keep my job as Xavier's assistant. But Xavier loved to pick on me, calling me into his office repeatedly for things we could have handled over the intercom. Or the days he'd ask me to get him food, only for him to reject it last minute. For the past 2 weeks, I ate so much resulting in weight gain. My usually lean figure was starting to show traces of extra fat. A gym membership was necessary. I couldn't afford to go back to how I looked before. It was a nightmare. Was Xavier trying to fatten me up like a cow before slaughter? Now again, he called me into his office. I felt a sickness in the pit of my stomach as I trudged down the hallway to Xavier's office. It was like trudging across a minefield with my eyes closed. Every step could be my last, every task my undoing, but hey, at least I had job security, right? My phone buzzed with a message notification in my friends group chat. Sam replied to the message I sent earlier. I had asked if we could grab a drink tonight, and he had replied with a thumbs up emoji. Ugh. I sighed at the lack of response from Reggie and knocked timidly at the door to the office, half prepared for Xavier to scream at me for disturbing his sacred work time. Instead, he called out a soft, "Come in." I pushed the door open and walked into the lion's den. Xavier sat at his desk, his handsome face unreadable as ever. "You wanted to see me, sir," I greeted, trying to keep my voice from shaking despite the flutter of anxiety in my chest. His eyes went up away from the contract in front of him. I hated to admit it, but I felt important every time he looked at me like this. Moments when I looked into his eyes and my reflection stared back at me. I wondered how Mr. Thomas would react if he found out how much I loved his stares. He'd probably call me a gay weirdo. He wouldn't be the first anyway. "Sit down, Mr. Young." His voice sounded relatively neutral, yet there was something tense at the same time under the mask of indifference. I sat down in the chair on the other side of the table and rubbed my palms together. The dampness of my palms was notable due to the cold wind blowing from the air conditioner. "Yes, sir," I answered, braced myself for a fresh sadistic chore from him. Instead of commanding me to bring yet another shirt to the cleaners or shouting over a failure on my part, Xavier asked me a question that knocked the wind out of me. "Do you know who I am, Danny?" I blinked in confusion, my mind racing. "You're Mr. Thomas, CEO of one of the largest acquisition companies in NYC. Did he lose his mind? Was it a trick question? Maybe he lost his memory and I was the only person he recognized. Oh, that was going to be fun. Don't be stupid, Cuppy. I know my identity. I'm asking if you recognize me," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. Wait, he just called me Cuppy. I squinted, feeling my contact lenses move. I strained every eye muscle, tracking over his facial features. Eyes, face, nose. Damn. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. "Pudgy?" I gasped, my eyes widening in disbelief. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That's right. Xavier Thomas. We used to be classmates in high school." Holy crap, how could I have missed it? My pudgy best friend with the oversized glasses and perpetual pimple problem was now sitting in front of me, all grown up and looking like something out of a GQ magazine. But before I could wrap my head around this unexpected revelation, Xavier's expression turned serious again. "Listen, Danny," he said, his tone serious. "Just because we have a history doesn't mean you can slack off at work. I expect nothing but the best from my employees. Understand?" I nodded dumbly, still trying to process the fact that my former high school crush / best friend was now my boss. Talk about a plot twist. Pudgy was my only friend. We were like two peas in a pod. We both used glasses and we were both quite overweight. After an accidental kiss in the locker room, he also became my gay awakening. But Xavier wasn't finished yet. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. With that, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand, turning back to his papers as if I were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I lingered in the doorway for a moment, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and excitement coursing through my veins. On one hand, I was thrilled to have rediscovered my long-lost friend from high school. On the other hand, it seemed that Xavier had changed in more ways than one, and not necessarily for the better. But hey, who was I to judge? Maybe he had his reasons for being so cold and distant. Maybe he was just under a lot of pressure, being the CEO of such a big company and all. With a resigned sigh, I turned and made my way back to my desk, already dreading the next inevitable summons from Xavier. But just as I was about to lose myself in a mountain of paperwork, my phone buzzed with a new notification from Reggie, and it read, "Sam promised to do something with me today. We'll get there late." It wouldn't be the first time. Despite my despair, an idea popped into my head. Why not invite Xavier out for a drink? It would give us a chance to catch up, reminisce about the good old days, and maybe even mend our fractured friendship. Plus, it would be a great excuse to get out of the office and let off some steam. I glanced at the clock and saw that it was almost time to get off work. Perfect. With a new sense of determination, I grabbed my coat and headed into the office again. I stood in the doorway and poked my head in. "Pudge, sir, let's grab a drink. Just one." "I already said, no special treatment." I nodded my head. "I know, but it's been so long, and back then, you just disappeared all of a sudden." Xavier tapped his fingers against the table and agreed with a grunt. "Fine. Give me 5 minutes." Xavier drove me to the club. The car ride was silent, so I was grateful for the loud music in the club that filled my ears. Xavier didn't question why I wanted to drink in a club instead of a bar. We ordered drinks, and I downed the first bottle of whiskey. "Slow down," Xavier advised, loosening the button of his suit jacket. My gaze landed on his long manicured fingers, following each bend. "You still have nice fingers. Give them to me," I giggled as the alcohol hit me square in the face. I leaned closer to Xavier, my words slurring slightly. "You know, Xavier," I began, my words a little too loud in the crowded club. "You're like the brother I never had. My best friend. Well, except for that one time in high school when we almost kissed in the locker room." Xavier's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Ah, yes. That was an accident." I giggled, feeling a little dizzy from the alcohol. Good times, good times. But then, like a cold splash of water to the face, reality came crashing back in. "But, seriously, Xavier, I don't know what to do about friends. I have new ones, but they always ditch me. I'm starting to feel like a third wheel in my own life." "Danny, maybe it's time to have a heart-to-heart with them. Communication is key in any relationship, whether it's friendship or otherwise." Xavier's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. I nodded my head. His words comforted me. "You're right, Xavier. I'll talk to them tomorrow, I promise." Suddenly, I was hugging Xavier tightly, my face buried into the hollow of his neck. "I missed you, Pudgy," I said through gritted teeth, inhaling the scent of his cologne. I looked into his eyes, then down at his lips. Over and over again, with a single thought in my mind, kissing him would feel divine. For a moment, it felt like everything was perfect again, like we were back in high school, two misfits against the world. But just as soon as the feeling had come, the moment broke with the shrill ringing of Xavier's cell phone. He pulled away from me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Danny, I have to take this. It's my fiancé." Before I could wrap my mind around what this meant for us, I lurched forward, vomiting all over myself and him, all down the front of his impeccable tailored suit. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Say, oh damn, I'm so sorry." In my defense, he forced me to eat the noodles. Xavier's face twisted in disgust as he tried to wipe the vomit off his suit, his expression a mix of irritation and resignation. "It's fine, Danny," he muttered through his clenched teeth, his voice strained with barely concealed frustration. "Let's just get you home." And just like that, the night was over. I stumbled out of the club with Xavier's help, feeling like the world's biggest idiot as I hailed a cab and slumped into the back seat, my head spinning with a potent mixture of alcohol and embarrassment. A few weeks passed in a blur of awkward encounters and uncomfortable silences. Xavier and I both pretended like nothing had happened the night at the club. But the tension between us hung heavy in the air, like a thick fog obscuring the truth. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, I overheard a conversation in the break room that changed everything. "I heard Xavier Thomas is planning to buy out Cavill," one of my co-workers whispered conspiratorially to another, their voices barely above a whisper. My ears perked up at the mention of Xavier's name. My curiosity piqued. "Cavill? Isn't that Carl Woodson's company?" "Please say no." My silent plea went unheard as she nodded. Carl Woodson again, a name that haunted me all through high school. Scratch that. It was a name that haunted Xavier and I, our high school bully. What was he up to? Sometime later. It didn't take me long to figure out what he was up to. Xavier pulled me along to his acquisition meeting. I had no choice but to sit through the next hour of Xavier selling Carl's company to a co-company. Now Xavier had 60% of shares in Cavill. The menacing look in his eyes was no joke. This was his revenge. Carl stormed out immediately. I lingered until Xavier was the only one left. "What the hell was that, Xavier?" I yelled, unable to comprehend the fact that Xavier still held a grudge. Almost a decade later and he was still out for blood? "Don't look at me like that, Danny. You know what he did to us." He leaned back in his chair and placed his feet on the other. I scoffed, shoving our papers into a document jacket. "I know what he did almost 10 years ago. I've forgiven him." Xavier's eyes flashed with fury, his voice dripping with disdain as he looked down at me. "And what about you, great forgiver Danny? What about your pathetic excuse for a life? You're so afraid of confrontation that you let people walk all over you, and then you wonder why your friends don't respect you?" His words cut deep, slicing through the facade of bravado I had built up around myself. I knew he was right, but I refused to let him see how much his words hurt. Instead, I squared my shoulders and met his gaze head-on. "If my life annoys you so much, Xavier, then why don't you help me fix it?" I retorted, my voice tinged with defiance. "Why don't you put your money where your mouth is and actually do something to help me instead of tearing other people down?" For a moment, there was silence between us, the tension crackling the air like electricity. And then, to my surprise, Xavier's expression softened. His eyes filled with an unexpected sense of compassion. "Fine, Danny," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "If you're serious about making a change, then let's make a deal. I'll help you improve your life, but you have to promise me one thing." I raised an eyebrow in curiosity, intrigued despite myself. "And what's that?" Xavier's lips quirked up into a faint smile, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. "You have to promise me that you won't fall in love with me." "No promises." I couldn't help but give a nervous laugh at his audacity. Sometime later. Xavier kept his promise, starting with my so-called friends. With his support and encouragement, I called Reggie and Sam out on their bullshit. As usual, they viewed my messages on the group chat and ignored it. The truth was bitter, but it went down my throat with smooth closure. "That chapter has closed. It's time to open another," Xavier consoled, giving me a pat on the head. "You need new friends." I reclined on his office couch and sighed. "Where will I find them?" "I have the perfect place." I shouldn't have trusted him. "Xavier, is this the perfect place?" I asked, mouth agape at the sight of the gay club in front of us. Xavier chuckled. "You need friends and a man of your own, if you ask me." Well, I didn't. Whatever feelings I had for Xavier disintegrated in that moment. Imagine your crush setting you up on blind dates. How amazing. I gave myself a little pep talk before getting seated in the club. The loud music and strobe lights brought my senses to life as Xavier ordered drinks. Within 5 minutes, our table had its first visitor, a skinny blonde that headed directly towards Xavier. "Hey, big man," he drawled sexily, placing his hand on Xavier's shoulder. I choked on my drink, feeling it snort out of my nostrils. Probably using me as an excuse to escape, Xavier brushed off the blonde dude and wiped my face. How subtle. I apologized on Xavier's behalf to the bewildered man. "I'm sorry, he's just concerned and engaged to be married." Xavier paid Blondie no attention after I blushed bright red as his finger grazed my neck. Scratch what I said about feelings disintegrating. It's fine. Just a quick tip. You shouldn't be sitting in the singles corner if you're engaged, Blondie said, pointing towards the green light beside our table. Clueless, I wondered how Xavier knew it was the singles spot. We're engaged and we shouldn't— Wait a minute. I meant he. I pointed to Xavier for good measure. He's engaged to a female. I'm not. As if he wasn't part of the conversation, Xavier continued to wipe the spilled alcohol off my body. Blondie wasn't buying a word of my explanation. My name's Carlton, by the way. I glanced at his outstretched hand and looked towards Xavier for a prompt. I felt like a kid on the playground all over again. Shyly, I clasped my fingers around Carlton's. Nice to meet you. I'm Daniel, but you can call me Danny. Hi, Danny boy, Carlton teased, tickling my chin with his finger. Xavier kept his gaze locked on Carlton's finger like a wolf ready to attack. Hands off. Carlton obeyed with a mischievous giggle, and his glaze darted between Xavier and me. He knew. 1 month later. Just tell him you like him, Carlton had advised, placing a cold cucumber slice over his eyelid. It was easier said than done. My attraction towards Xavier had been there since high school, and now he was engaged. To make matters worse, he liked women. Carlton had been able to identify his fiancée easily. Dahlia Pearl, heir to the Pearl business. The perfect match for Xavier. She even surpassed my history with Xavier. Apparently, they'd been friends since birth. How was I supposed to compete with that? Carlton threw an eye slice into his mouth and munched loudly. Don't think you can't compete with her. I just became your friend a month ago, and I am avidly competing with Xavier, who you've known since school. You have a point. I need to get dressed, then Xavier will pick me up in a few minutes. Xavier mentioned something about a surprise, and I was excited. I got dressed, and Xavier picked me up in an hour. He drove to a 5-star French restaurant. My heart threatened to explode with each step I took. All my outings with Xavier usually happened at home or in a club or bar. As we stepped into the elegant French restaurant, my hopes soared. Maybe Xavier had finally noticed my feelings. Maybe this surprise dinner was his way of telling me he felt the same way. But alas, my hopes were dashed when I saw her sitting at the table, looking every bit the picture of elegance and grace. Dahlia Pearl, Xavier's fiancée. She was like something out of a fashion magazine, with her sleek blonde hair and designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I felt a mix of rage and disappointment. How could he have done this to me? To us? But just as I was about to storm out of the restaurant in anger, Dahlia grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a small woman. Sit down, Danny, she said in a firm but gentle voice. We need to talk. I sat across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. What? I demanded angrily and fearfully at the same time. Xavier sighed and ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, Danny, I know this is all too much, he said. What? My curiosity sparked. Dahlia took a deep breath and held my gaze with her own, intense yet vulnerable. The truth is Xavier and I aren't actually engaged. Xavier cut her off before I could process anything else, she said. Dahlia, we agreed we weren't. Everything fell out from under me as I gasped out loud in shock. What do you mean you're not engaged? I spent hours reading articles about their lovely story. Was it all fake? Xavier reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was surprisingly warm and comforting. It's complicated, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Dahlia is gay too, and father won't let her inherit the family business because she's a woman. On my end, my father doesn't know that his son is gay, so we came up with this fake engagement as a way to keep them both off our backs. I blinked in shock, trying to wrap my head around this unexpected revelation. So Xavier was gay, and all this time, I'd been pining after him like a lovesick puppy, completely oblivious to the truth. Since when did you accept your sexuality? I asked, trying to make sense of it all. It couldn't be what I was thinking. Xavier grabbed a glass of red wine and chugged it down like a frat boy at a party. Since high school. Since high school, I whispered. My mind flashed back to the kiss in the locker room and my heart soared. Was it the kiss? He turned to me dead serious. No, it was you. My fork hit the plate with a loud clang, but before I could dwell on this newfound knowledge any longer, Xavier dropped another bombshell that left me reeling. And there's something else you should know. What? Do you remember the car that almost crashed into you on your way to work on the first day? How could I have forgotten? The driver almost ruined my life. Yeah, I remember. Xavier turned my chair around with the heel of his foot and pointed outside the parking lot. Through the glass walls, I could see the SUV we came in. It was the same car. My jaw dropped in disbelief. The pieces of the puzzle finally started to fall into place. You knew it was me all along? Yeah, I did. So that's why he'd been so insistent on hiring me as his personal assistant. All this time he'd been trying to get closer to me, to be involved in my life in any way he could. I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside of me, like a whirlpool threatening to pull me under. Anger, confusion, relief, and something else I couldn't quite name. Was it pleasure? Before I could process any of this, Dahlia leaned in closer, her voice low and urgent. Danny, there's something else you need to know. Xavier, he likes you. A lot. It was quite obvious at this point, but could it be true? Could Xavier really have feelings for me? My head is spinning right now. Do you like me? I questioned with a bit of hope. Xavier shook his head with a self-loathing smile. I do. You're just blind. Why else did I keep calling you into my office and feeding you every day? Because you wanted to torture me, I replied matter-of-factly. Dahlia chortled. You're terrible at this. I should have just told you. Xavier scooted his chair into the shadows at our corner and beckoned for me to come over. I looked around confused as I walked closer to him. What? He pulled me into his lap and my worldview did a 360. My cheeks burned as he caressed my skin. His eyes were heavy with words unsaid. Unable to control myself, I leaned closer and closer and closer until our lips met in a soft kiss. A burning desire to go further enveloped me as Xavier took control of the kiss, sweeping his tongue through my mouth. You know, the fiancé is still right in front of you. Save some for later, Dahlia groaned. I jumped up to my feet immediately, fighting against the weakness in my knees. I'm sorry. Xavier scooted his chair back to the table, and I tried to place another kiss on his forehead. But just as I was about to let myself sink, Xavier pulled away and glanced around the restaurant nervously. We need to be careful, Danny. I like you, but my father can't find out about us. He'd never approve of our relationship. We have to be careful in public. My heart sank at his words. Was I doomed to be nothing more than Xavier's dirty little secret? 2 weeks later. Love hurt like hell. It wasn't supposed to, but it did. It was exactly 2 weeks of love, stolen kisses, and hidden dates. Before we confessed our feelings, I was still able to go out on dates with Xavier. But since we became an official couple, Xavier became even more paranoid. We couldn't even go to bars, restaurants, or clubs. I tried to fix it by getting movie tickets to see Star Wars. It didn't work. Xavier flared up and complained about my lack of understanding. Was I being too demanding? Okay, maybe I was unable to see things from his perspective. I came out to my parents when I was 16. It was never a secret, even at school, but things were different for Xavier. He lived in fear of disappointing his father and losing the company. I also had my own fear. I feared the day my frustration would boil over, the day I wouldn't be able to handle holding his hand through the closet door. You called for me, sir? I intentionally added the sir to be petty as I stood in front of Xavier's desk. I'm sorry, Danny, he apologized. I gave him a sideways look, but resisting the pull into his lap, I couldn't even get mad at him. I missed him, his scent, his touch. I leaned into him, drunk on his touch. Without a word, Xavier closed the gap and kissed me fervently. I kissed back, tingling with desire. It was wrong to do this during office hours, but I craved for his touch, for more. I wrapped my arms around his neck and he leaned my back against the table. What is going on here? A deep voice asked from the doorway, jolting both of us out of our daze. I landed on the floor with a thud and Xavier's pace failed as if he'd seen a ghost. Father, what are you doing here? I followed his gaze to the doorway where an older version of Xavier stood, gaping in absolute mortification. A few minutes later, Mr. Thomas Sr. was equipped with a hot cup of chamomile tea. Xavier and I sat on the chairs opposite him. He sighed multiple times before clearing his throat. "Xavier, explain." Xavier looked defeated, head bowed and shoulders hunched. As much as I wanted him to stand for his truth, it was hurting him. So I spoke up. "Sir, I'm sorry for seducing your son. It wasn't his fault. I came on to him." "Oh, really? His hands on your ass when I came in proves otherwise," Mr. Thomas remarked snidely. I choked on my own spit. Xavier definitely got his smart mouth from his father. I tried to explain again. "He was trying to pull me off." "By holding your behind?" "Not exact." "That's enough," Xavier interrupted, taking my hand into his. "Father, as you saw earlier, I was kissing my secretary, who is a man, because I like men." For some reason, the pauses in between his words made me laugh. This earned me a scowl from Thomas Sr. and Jr. "Stop laughing." "I'm sorry," I chuckled. "What about my legacy, Xavier? What about Dahlia? She'll be so heartbroken, that poor girl." Xavier scratched his neck awkwardly. "Dahlia is gay too. She has a girlfriend. Their relationship is 7 years old." "What?" Thomas Sr. choked, face flushing red. "Oh, that's not good," I remarked, pouring him a new cup of tea. But it was too late. We had successfully given the poor man a heart attack. Thankfully, the heart attack was mild. It took Mr. Thomas Sr. a couple days to come around, but he did. His first step was to cancel the engagement and apologize to Dahlia's family. Xavier was relieved and happy. For the first time in almost a decade, he felt free to be himself. Too free, as a matter of fact. I was bombarded with public dates and vacations with extreme PDA. Sometimes I miss the low-key Xavier that didn't kiss me in front of boardroom meetings. By the way, I saw a ring in his coat pocket 2 days ago. He also mentioned a weekend vacation to the Maldives. I know it's coming and patience is a virtue, but still, I can't wait. We both found love, fulfillment, and I made a new friend. Love and acceptance felt way better as a pair. The end. Can you love someone who is still in the closet? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.